Territories and Coast Peoples. A few housekeeping notes before we get going. If anyone needs to use the facility, just down the hallway to the left once you exit the room. And also, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share with us, we do have these written feedback forms that you can work with us if you have a more detailed comment that our office will use to compile and policy discussions when I return to the House of Commons and indeed for the upcoming federal election. So I've always been interested in the subject of renewable energy because it's, when you look at the energy sources that abound around us on this beautiful planet, if you look at the amount of energy that hits the Earth from the sun, you know, in under an hour, enough energy reaches the Earth from the sun that could power all of humanity's needs for a year. If you look at the sheer force of the gravitational pull of the moon on our tides, the amount of wind that blows all around this Earth, the power of the waves, the rivers that run, and indeed right below our feet, the temperature of the Earth that powers geothermal energy. All around us are these incredible forces, and it just seems to me that we are on the cusp of harnessing them to their full benefit. And they're all around there for the taking. So I've always really been interested in how we as a society, as a race, the human race around the world, can harness these forces and make them work for us in a way that takes care of our planet. The other big reason why I'm very much interested in this subject is because when you look at the headlines that are currently occupying our papers around the world, we can see reports like this. So I think a lot of the people in this room are aware of the recent United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, showing that with the amount of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere, the rates of warming are happening far quicker than we originally thought. And I think humanity has been put on notice that unless we change our ways and find a way to stop releasing so much carbon into our atmosphere, we are going to start a process where it's an irreversible change in our temperature. And you know, we can continue to see it. The scientists agree that we are causing global warming, and we are the ones who have the ability to actually change our ways to actually fix the problem. And so, just to put it into perspective, you know, what this means, because I often see the argument around climate change framed in an economic one. And currently in Ottawa, we're very much occupied with the costs of the carbon tax, et cetera, and what the cost to our economy will be. Well, if you look at economic reports, and I know the United Kingdom commissioned a really good one, the Stern report several years ago, the economic costs of not doing anything are going to far outweigh the costs of actually acting upon this. Some estimates put the costs of climate change at somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of the world's GDP. So when you put it in that perspective, we're not talking billions of dollars, we're getting into trillions of dollars. And in British Columbia last year, we saw the forest fires, which is going to be a reoccurring theme. I know from my role as the agriculture critic, speaking with farmers, they are all saying they're on the front lines of climate change. They can no longer predict stable weather patterns. Their crops are suffering because they just don't know if it's going to be a drought year or if they're going to be flooded out. We look at the coastal inundation that's going to happen when most of humanity lives in a coastal area. I mean, if you just look at Vancouver Airport, it's only a few meters above sea level. And just think of how much commerce runs through Vancouver Airport on a single day. So the economic costs of doing nothing are going to be significant. But if you look at what's really under threat, because you know, we keep on hearing about scientists talking about, well, the Earth's temperature, if we continue down this path, could rise from anywhere to 1 to 5 degrees Celsius. Doesn't seem like a lot, right? Well, let me just show you what that means. So if we experience a 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, these are some of the things that we're going to start to see happen. If we see a 2 degree rise in Celsius in temperature, these are some of the things that we're going to see happen. And 3 degrees. What happens when we hit 4 degrees? And what happens when we hit 5 degrees? So as you can see, we're looking at some pretty cataclysmic events. We're going to see a huge amount of humanity that's going to be pushed off the traditional areas that they've lived in. Large parts of the world are no longer going to be able to sustain agriculture, and entire natural processes of the traditional water flows are going to be interrupted. So this is going to be a significant cost to us. And, you know, our federal government certainly has announced some initiatives. I've already mentioned the carbon tax. There have been some investments in green infrastructure, in mitigating and adapting to climate change, making sure that we're making investments in a low carbon economy fund, and so on. But when you look at some of the other things that have occurred, we are still leading the G7 in oil and gas subsidies to this day, in 2019. We are prepared to spend $4.5 billion to buy a bitumen exporting pipeline, but we can't cough up that kind of money to address the climate or address the housing crisis. And even our own scientists in the federal government are saying that with our current policies, it is going to be virtually impossible for us to meet the goals of the Paris Accord in just 11 short years. So it's a serious matter, and that's why I think it's incumbent upon us to not just dwell on the problem, but to look at what possible solutions are, how we're going to actually get ourselves out of this mess. And so I'm really happy to welcome 4 people here tonight who have various topics that they're going to inform you about. The first person that I'd like to introduce is Brian Roberts, who I've known for a few years now, up from the Cowichan Valley. He is a founding member of the Cowichan Biodiesel Co-op, and he has also helped found the Cowichan Energy Alternative Society, which is a non-profit in the Cowichan Valley that basically researchers used to research and implement renewable energy solutions and develop local low-carbon economies. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Brian up to the stage, and he can talk a little bit about his work in this very important field. So thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Everyone can hear me okay? And can everyone see the presentation here? Can everyone see the text, or would it help to turn these lights off here, or is that possible? Turn those down.
The text is pretty clear from back.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Is everyone okay with it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Perfect. Let's roll then. So Cowichan Energy Alternative Society is a nonprofit based in the Cowichan Valley, and we kind of like to think of ourselves as mad scientists in the renewable energy and the low carbon economy area. A lot of us in the nonprofit have a scientific background, and we're really focused on solutions and doing things. We're not so interested in talking about the actual whether climate change is happening or not anymore. We think that there's a nice critical mass of people who believe that already, like ourselves, and want to do things about it. So what we focus on is trying to create solutions that everyday people can use right now to address their carbon emissions. And we try to develop systems that actually reward people for every ton of carbon they reduce by focusing on small, medium-sized businesses and bringing them kind of into the carbon marketplace and actually developing projects with them where they can actually adopt renewable energies, adopt strategies that reduce their emissions, and then we basically monetize that. We create carbon credits and we sell them to local governments, other businesses that want to be carbon neutral but can't in their own kind of operations. And in that way, we actually harness the system, and it kind of slows down all the bad activities that we want to kind of put a carbon tax on, and it redirects that money to the good activities we want to encourage in the community. So really, we kind of narrow that down our vision to when we look forward to the future that we want. It's made up of resilient communities on a healthy planet. And our mission is to empower people to adopt sustainable practices that support resilient communities and that healthy planet. And our mottos, we like to lead by example, advocate by doing, and this is kind of summed up as be the change. So since I am being hosted here by our agriculture critic, I thought I would connect energy with agriculture. And this is a very, very important graph in so many different ways, because if you look at it, you can see that since the Industrial Revolution, we've become more and more dependent on oil to produce our agriculture. It used to be domestic animals, labor, were doing most of the work that was generating the agricultural production. And now it's almost like basically greater than 90% fossil fuel. And that should be a real warning to all of us, because that shows in more ways than one, we're a fossil fuel-based civilization. And if we want to stop using petroleum, we're going to stop eating right now. And so this is going to be a very, very complicated problem that we have to face. So we have to look at a myriad of different solutions. There's no silver bullet solutions here. We have to look at what we've got, where we've got it, and that's exactly what Couch Energy tries to do, working with different communities. So our local and global challenge. We focus a lot on transportation here in the island because 58%, well, even in BC, 58 of BC's greenhouse gas emissions, according to the Community Energy Emissions Inventory, are from driving, and that's about just under 40% if you look at the 2015 Climate Leadership Plan. So there's different ways of calculating those things, but it's still high, and pretty much one of the highest, if not the highest, source of emissions. 55% of emissions in the Capital Regional District are from driving. Even higher in rural areas, in Sandwich, 62%, 72%, whopping 72% in the Cowichan Valley, where we don't have a lot of transportation solutions. And so this really brings into light the IPCC's quote here, that without aggressive and sustained mitigation policies being implemented, vehicle emissions may increase at a faster rate than any other energy end uses. So that's pretty concerning for us. Transportation is a major issue that we have to look at if we're going to address global climate change, especially on an individual level. Greenhouse gas emissions from commercial and industrial transportation. 50% of BC's total emissions are from commercial and transport industrial activities. That includes transportation and all their activities. 10% of the CRD's annual emissions are from the use of about 54 million liters of diesel, and about nearly 80% of the CRD's diesel usage is concentrated in vehicle, tractor trailer, truck, and bus fleets. So now we're starting to concentrate things and see where some low-hanging fruit is for being able to reduce emissions. And as I was kind of alluding to before, we don't see that there's going to be necessarily a magic silver bullet solution to replacing hydrocarbons when we're so dependent on them. And so we look at a number of different solutions. We think of supporting a shift to electric vehicles and drop-in renewable fuels such as ethanol and biodiesel and other renewable options are important. And some considerations are the shift to electric vehicles. We see that as a long-term approach. You're going to have to build out a lot of infrastructure. That's going to take a lot of resources, and ironically enough, a lot of fossil fuels to build that out and implement it. So we see that as a long-term. And in some places, like in northern Canada, where the distance between towns is sometimes more than 1,000 kilometers, it may not be an option for a very long time. Also, a shift to low-carbon renewable fuels like biodiesel can be achieved very quickly with existing vehicle technology. Existing diesel engines can go on 100% biodiesel and be completely carbon neutral, and using existing fuel infrastructure with little or no modifications. So this is something we can do now, and it's something that everyday people can do whether they have an $80,000 Mercedes-Benz or a $500 liter Volkswagen Jetta. Observations and conclusions. Transportation represents the largest source of emissions that communities have the greatest potential to change, one by one, and as communities and as businesses in commercial areas of the economy. Commercial and industrial diesel usage represents a concentrated low-hanging fruit for targeting greenhouse gas reductions, particularly with diesel and biodiesel. biodiesel being a solution that can be implemented immediately to begin to reduce emissions, but also providing renewable options and incentivizing their adoption. Those silver bullet strategies that I talk about, such as carbon pricing, is key to achieving change. Penalizing the bad activities that we want, the polluting activities we want to slow down, redirecting that money through the carbon market to the areas that we want to subsidize, because right now, starting new green energies is always more expensive than a very heavily subsidized petroleum industry. So we want to try and level that playing field. Here's the ecosystem that I work in. Couch Energy, as alternatives, as I said, this is our logo down below. We kind of act as like these mad scientists developing out these projects. We incubate things, and then we kind of put them out to the world. We help manage and run the Couch and Biodiesel Co-op, and most recently we started, we turned out a new social enterprise called Ergo Eco Solutions, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them in just a minute. And this is kind of our toolbox. These are how we actually get our work out to people. And this will also, I'll tell you just a little bit more in a minute.
I'm
Ergo Eco
sorry,
Solutions.
probably everybody else knows, but what is biodiesel? I don't even know what it is.
Oh, I wish I had more than 10 minutes. I really do. Biodiesel, I'll just very, very quickly. Biodiesel is made from any basically lipid, like anything from any kind of vegetable oil, from coconut to soy oil to canola oil, sunflower oil, used cooking oil. You can make into biodiesel just through a chemical process, and then it's a drop-in fuel that you can use in any diesel vehicle, just made from vegetable oils. So that's the quick. Yes?
What are the emissions like in comparison to diesel fuel? I mean, diesel fuel has higher nitrous oxide and ozone emissions and other harmful chemicals. That's why Europe is in the process of eliminating diesel.
Exactly. Well, there is a lot of focus on the problems with diesel engines, but actually diesel engines have lower CO2 emissions, which is why one of the reasons why they're focusing on them before the Volkswagen scandal. But in a way, this is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not the diesel engine that's the problem; it's the fuel that's being used in it. And so when you use biodiesel, everything is significantly reduced, except sometimes NOxes. And the NOxes can go up with soy oil, but with used cooking oil and higher saturated fats, it's actually down. So everything is reduced, and carcinogens reduced by 90%, carbon reduced by what can be carbon neutral, sulfur reduced by 100%. It's significant. So Ergo Eco Solutions, basically, it's focused on making sure that cooking oil doesn't get thrown in the sewers into the landfills, because this is a high energy source. And if you think about all the things that you can make from petroleum hydrocarbons, you can make almost all of those things like solvents, degreasers, paint cleaners, that sort of stuff from biodegradable, non-toxic, non-carcinogenic vegetable oil. And so Ergo, as well as using the cooking oil to help make biodiesel, which is distributed through the Couch and Biodiesel Co-op, it also has all this R&D program looking at all these other things that it can make with it. So waste cooking oil upcycled over 1 million liters in just the first 2 years that it's been in production. Newest Eco Solution products, we make a non-toxic biodegradable like dust suppressant, so in times during drought in the Cowichan Valley when you can't put water on, you can't put creosol on like the good old days, right? So you can't put hydrocarbons on, but you can use vegetable oil derivatives. Green form and paving release agent. It used to be that paving companies, when they were putting paving on roads, would drive by and they would spray diesel fuel on the roller while they were driving by ditches and streams, and all of that was going into the environment. Well, we can make a non-toxic biodegradable one that's vegetable oil based. A Couch and Biodiesel Co-op. So over about 250 members over the time it's been around since 2005. I think getting close to 300 now. Since 2005, we have produced and we've distributed 353,000 liters of biodiesel, reduced emissions by over 1,000 tons, and yeah, this is how we are now moving to distribute that fuel. So if you think about it, what we're kind of doing is we're trying to do all the things that a big integrated oil company does as a little nonprofit that doesn't have billions of dollars to do it. So instead of drilling for oil, we recycle cooking oil. Instead of processing oil in a big refinery. We have a little microbrewery, and we have to create our own gas stations. And this is a new model that we create. And we actually partner with local governments and family-run, like local fuel stations, to be able to do that, so that we don't have to pay millions of dollars actually to build our own gas stations. So there's this partnership community approach that we use. So at these Green Grove biofuel stations, we have one already in the Cowichan Valley at the Bings Creek Recycling Center. We have an agreement with the province to open up a second one that's going to be in partnership with the Cowichan Petroleum Sales in Duncan. We're looking for a place to build one here in kind of the Langford area down to Victoria. So if people are interested in getting one set up here, come and see me after. So it's right, you can create a biodiesel blend that's right for any vehicle. Superior mechanical benefits without compromising vehicle performance. It's convenient and easy to use. We've made it just like a regular gas station, can run up with a credit card. And it's a fill-and-go choice for people that can use now with existing diesel engine technology. With blends now actually cheaper than regular diesel. So that is that, and here are just some testimonials from people who use it, everything from local farmers to fleet managers. And for a while we had a bus company in Victoria that was using 100% biodiesel in all their bus fleet. So we also have the Community Carbon Marketplace. This is a program that is run by Cowichan Energy Alternatives. And the way that works, it's basically an online exchange to buy and sell community carbon credits generated from a wide range of emission-reducing activities, everything from using biofuels to fuel switching to use electric vehicles, diverting organics from landfills, building retrofits, all these different things. So for those who can reduce emissions beyond carbon neutral, we can actually pay you for every ton of carbon that you reduce. And then we can make those credits available for people who want to become carbon neutral, but they can't, like local governments, because they have a big vehicle fleet or they have all these buildings that they're managing. And so then we help local governments become carbon neutral that way. Some of our achievements: 6,500 tons of CO2 reduced through the program so far, and still quite small scale. 160,000 revenues, with 80% of that directed to basically community projects, community groups. 7 carbon neutral governments. 7 governments have been carbon neutral through this program. And we have a 4-phase program where we go into a community and we look at the potential of the community to reduce emissions, partner with the local government, and we basically help kickstart the low carbon economy with this program. And here's a testimonial from one of our latest partners in Squamish that uses this program. We help this nonprofit basically through their program to generate extra money, which they're using to the benefit of their nonprofit. And so I've ended with this for I don't know how many different years now, and I think it still says so much, really. It basically that to me the climate change debate is not even worth having in some ways, just because there's so many other benefits to doing what we're looking at doing, and having a distributed energy production model based on sustainable, renewable energies, and trying to make resilient communities sustainable communities. So that's us in a nutshell. Thanks so much for your attention.
Okay, and thank you very much for that, Brian. And as the agriculture critic, I know farmers. I've already mentioned them being on the front lines of climate change, but also there is a lot of concern amongst farmers because of their very tight margins about the carbon tax. But what I'm really interested in terms of developing policy from an agricultural perspective is just looking at how well-managed agricultural systems can in fact be one of our greatest tools against climate change, because well-managed, healthy soils have an amazing ability to sequester carbon, and they're actually much better able to withstand the effects of both drought and floods, because they can absorb a lot of water but also retain a lot of water. So if a farmer has a healthy soil and he's putting a lot of carbon into the soil, that soil is going to be much more productive, but it's also going to be able to, for him to better withstand the effects. And there's some amazing carbon sequestration potentials of healthy soils. So with that, I'd like to invite our next guest up, Steve Unger, who's with Viridian Energy Cooperative. This is an organization that I'm very familiar with because I had them a couple of years ago install solar panels on my roof. I was on a tour yesterday in the Cowichan Valley of a solar farm. Someone up in the Cowichan Valley has donated a large part of their property to a huge array of solar panels. And I can tell you it's very satisfying, especially in the summer months, to watch in real time just how much my own roof is generating in electricity and the credit that I get to receive with BC Hydro when I'm actually feeding back into the grid. So, you know, you can just imagine if you multiply that effect with all of the roof space we've got in our communities, just how much energy that each house could be capable of generating. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite Steve up, and he can talk a little bit about the amazing work that Meridian is doing. Thank you. I'm here to give that up. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me here today. And can you guys hear me in the back? So I first of all want to start off with I think is one of the greatest innovations in renewable energy technology that I have seen in a long time. It's called the solar linear dryer. Now this is a little bit farcical, but it's also serious because all renewable energy has to start with conservation. We have to use less energy. We have to be very careful and very intentional about the energy we use. So as much as this is funny, go out and get a clothesline. It's the cheapest, best bang for the buck that you can get with renewable energy. Conservation, because the less energy we use, we can maintain places like this. Now for my discussion, I just want a little bit of background information. Within the industry, the majority of stuff is priced by dollar per watt. So the amount of money it costs for the number of watts that you get. So just keep this in mind while I'm talking. A little bit more background how grid tie works. I apologize for those of you who know, but just to get on the same page. So basically, number one, the sun produces energy that's picked up by your solar panels. Those solar panels, the energy from it is not compatible with your house. So you need something called an inverter to convert it from solar energy into household electricity. That electricity is consumed and used by your house, by the appliances, by your fridge, by your stove, by your radio, by your computer, whatever you have on at that particular time. If there's any surplus left over, it's fed back to BC Hydro through your meter. From BC Hydro, you build up a credit. That credit can be used in the winter, in the evenings, basically when you don't have sun shining on your house. And that way, a grid tie system doesn't have any batteries. It's simple, it's easy to use. And if you have enough solar panels and you generate enough electricity during the summer, you can actually be net zero through the year. So you store your summer sun with BC Hydro and you draw upon it during the winter. Now in terms of solar panel innovations, this is pretty cool, but don't expect to see it on your front lawn unless... Now, what they are talking about is the technology is changing. Here's one of the latest ones that's coming out. It's called a split cell solar panel. It's actually split in half, much more powerful. Translucence. A lot of architectural work is being done with these. So imagine where you used to put a skylight, they now put translucent solar panels in there. Bifacial solar panels. So you basically have the solar panels on two sides. So if you have something standing up or it's near a reflective surface, you can get not only the direct sunlight, but the indirect reflected sunlight. And then of course the solar roof tiles, which Elon Musk has made a big hubbub about. We'll find out if they actually end up being universally available on the market. Basically, those solar panels are getting smarter. They started off, they were just simple devices, and over the years they've been adding monitoring, safety, optimization, and even a whole bunch of more longer streams and stuff into them. So the technology, the underlying technology hasn't changed much, but certainly the implementation has come a long way. And of course the biggest change in solar technology in the last few years is the cost of it. So here in 1977, Jimmy Carter paid about $77 per watt, not per solar panel, per watt, to put solar panels on the White House. If Donald Trump wanted to do the same thing today, he would pay 36 cents a watt. Of course, Donald Trump doesn't believe in climate change, so he's unlikely to do that. What we're really saying here is basically what's going on in the market is you have the same size solar panels, but you have way more power at a much, much lower price. So there you can see well below $1 a watt per solar panel. And of course, that means the overall install cost has gone down significantly. So in 2011, or I should say 2012 when Meridian was set up, it was costing about $8 a watt to install solar. As of this year, it's probably $2.50, $2.40 to do the same thing. And you're getting more power with the system. It's a bigger system. So it's been almost a fourfold drop in the last 8 years. Another thing that's happened is grid parity. You can see somewhere between 2016 and 2018 is when the cost of producing your energy off of your roof became less than buying it from BC Hydro. So about 2017, it's now cheap, from 2017 until now, it's now cheaper for you to produce your own energy than to buy it from the utility from BC Hydro. And of course, it will continue getting cheaper because BC Hydro rates are only going to go up, and the solar panel prices that you are paying are fixed because you bought the energy now at today's prices. Now this is what energy looked like before the Industrial Revolution. It all basically came from the sun. In fact, some people argue that all energy comes from the sun originally, I guess except for that little bit that's generated by the core of the planet. This is what energy looked like in the 19th century. Pretty dire. 20th century, it actually got worse, if it's at all possible. Here's what energy should look like in the 21st century. This is an example of a 60 kilowatt community solar garden in Nelson. This has actually been sponsored by Nelson Hydro. So they are selling solar panels to members of Nelson Hydro at $945 a solar panel, which entitles the members to, depending on the year, but about $50 credit on their hydro bill. Now they can buy multiple solar panels, and they were oversubscribed on their first offering. We need to see more of this.
Is BC Hydro interested in doing the program?
I'll get to that in 1 second, thank you. So, what's stopping us? Why don't we see solar farms everywhere? Well, our governments have decided to spend their money in different places. Apparently they'd rather spend $4.5 billion on a pipeline than on a solar farm. They'd also like to continue mega hydro projects, Site C dams and things like that, instead of solar farms. And of course, BC Hydro hasn't helped us at all. They are starting to curtail our ability to actually install solar and have solar farms. So to answer your question, no, BC Hydro won't let us do that anymore. Even Peter Nix, who visited yesterday, he would not be allowed to put his system up now based on the new rules that BC Hydro implemented in April. You're not allowed to generate any surplus, so you can install solar up to the amount of consumption that you have annually. There's no sharing amongst your neighbors, businesses, relatives, any of that stuff. No virtual net metering, it's called. And there's no ability for community initiatives. BC Hydro has basically canceled anything except for you to put a few solar panels on your house to cover some of your own costs.
So sorry, to clarify, when you say no surplus generation, your annual budget.
Yeah. So if your annual is 10,000 kilowatt hours per year, you can install solar up to, would generate 10,000 kilowatt hours per year. So what if we actually spent all of our Site C and pipeline money on renewable energy? So that would be about a $20 billion investment. It would generate about 13 gigawatts of power, which is a significant amount of power. It would generate 15 billion kilowatt hours per year. That's almost a number too big to understand, but it would power about 1.2 million homes. As far as I can figure it, about 4 times the number of homes on Vancouver Island. It would generate about 10,000 new jobs, and it would sequester almost 500,000 tons of CO2 per year. I would say it's a little better than a pipeline. So, if I had a dream, my dream would be conservation first, real government support second. We're not getting the government support, we're getting mostly lip service. I would like to see a democratized energy supply so that people could put up a solar farm and could contribute to the grid and could sell energy because they went out and made the investment. I would like to see the community be able to invest. We have lots of people who would love to go out and instead of buying RSPs, would love to buy shares in a solar farm if it was RSP eligible. Even if it wasn't, they would love to invest in a solar farm. But there are limitations that you can only invest $5,000 into that. But you can go off and buy $5 million of canola futures, whatever that is. And finally, BC is perfect for using solar in the summer and hydro in the winter. And by using solar in the summer, we're alleviating a lot of the demands on our reservoirs, we're leaving the water there for the animals and for the people, and we will actually keep the province a little bit cooler, a little bit wetter, and a little bit happier. So thank you very much.
All right, and next up, our next panelist, I would like to welcome up Tom Hackney from the BC Sustainable Energy Association, just to give us an idea of some of the many initiatives that your organization has been championing. And please come and take the stage. You've got a...
Yes, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. And thank you, Alistair, for this very topical subject. So, as Alistair said, my name is Tom Hackney. I represent the BC Sustainable Energy Association, a member-supported not-for-profit group working for a energy transition for all of BC off of fossil fuels and onto renewable energy. So we have we do a range of things, including going into schools, talking to students about climate change and energy issues. We go in front of the Utilities Commission to advocate for sustainable energy when BC Hydro or Fortis Gas comes forward with their energy plans. And here in the Southern Island, topical to tonight's topic, we have the 100% by 2050 renewable energy initiative that we're simply trying to persuade the municipalities in the South Island all to adopt this goal and then having adopted it to achieve it. So what does that mean? This is, it's kind of a positively stated equivalent of the 80% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2050 that you will have heard about if you've listened to international commitments around the Paris Accord and addressing climate change. This is a whole community, not just the municipal or the government operations, and it's intended to be a strategic goal. The end goal in mind, not simply garnering the easiest measures possible. So 100% renewable energy by 2050 does have a solid analytical basis to it, although it is controversial, but very smart people like Dr. Mark Jacobson at Stanford University have crunched numbers to determine that yes, there are enough renewable energy resources to meet our needs if we deploy them wisely. People all over the world are getting enthusiastic about the idea of a 100% renewable energy transition. So this is the GO 100% Renewable Energy Initiative, just mapping the commitments by jurisdictions, towns, cities, countries around the world who have made commitments of this type. At the Paris Climate Conference, about 1,000 mayors coming forward with commitments to cut energy and greenhouse gas emissions. Here in the city of Vancouver, 2015, Vancouver committed to 100% renewable energy by 2050. And on the island, Victoria, Saanich, and Central Saanich have all made that commitment. And most recently, the province of BC has come out with its Clean BC plan, not specifically a 100% renewable energy plan, but it does contain targets for transportation, buildings, industry to reduce emissions, and these are the biggest energy users and the biggest emitters. So this is a pie chart of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. Just briefly, industry, including oil and gas, is the source of about 37% of our emissions. Transportation, about 23%. Buildings, 12%. And the generation of electricity, 11%. Agriculture and waste are greenhouse gas emissions that don't come from energy use by and large. So anyways, and keeping with tonight's topic, I'll stick with the energy. So the sources of our energy, this is from the National Energy Board statistics. The orange, pink, and brown lines are natural gas, oil, and coal, and you can see that they make up roughly 3/4 of our energy use currently, and the National Energy Board is actually projecting that that will stay about the same out to 2040. So in other words, unless we decide to take action to change that picture and make things more sustainable. So what would a federal clean energy plan entail? The federal government has some very powerful levers, and the ones that I've identified are, first of all, spending. It's in charge of inter-provincial transportation, international trade and treaties, environmental protection, national standards it has power over, and it does economic planning. So spending, the first and foremost, I would recommend that the government apply a green screen to all its spending, tied, in other words, to greenhouse gas emissions and a plan to reduce them. So second bullet, no infrastructure boondoggles. There's a great deal of pressure to build large, expensive projects. And highway expansions on Mackenzie Interchange, $85 million. Nanaimo Airport is expanding, $2.6 million. The Northwest Transmission Line off BC Hydro's grid, $704 million. So if we're going to expand our grid, like as with expanding the BC-Alberta intertie, I would recommend strongly looking at the costs and the benefits before plunging into it. No fossil fuel subsidies, of course, that's an obvious one. Put subsidies to renewable energy. Put more support for public transit and more support for building efficiency upgrades. On the last point there, this is what a homeowner can do, moving off of oil and onto a highly efficient heat pump. You see the red line is oil going down to zero, the blue line, electricity, cost of electricity, just going up a small amount with an electric heat pump. Next point, inter-provincial transportation, a national transportation demand management strategy for freight and passengers. In other words, we need to look at disciplining ourselves in terms of how much we actually move ourselves around. And apply a green screen, as I mentioned before. International trade and agreements. Again, apply a green screen, greenhouse gas emissions target to trade deals. Trade brings profits, it also brings a lot of transportation. We could be looking at a North American freight transportation demand management deal with the Americans and the Mexicans, make our transportation system more efficient, put pressure on North American vehicle manufacturers to produce more electric vehicles and make their fleets more efficient. We could have an international agreement to cap and reduce air travel. Environmental protection. In terms of greenhouse gas policy, carbon pricing and regulation, both, not one or the other. And again, a stronger green screen for the projects that the federal government funds. National standards. The federal government is in a position to exercise a lot of leadership in terms of all kinds of uses of energy, in particular building energy efficiency. The national government with its national code that is typically adopted by the provinces. Higher efficiency standards for vehicles, equipment, appliances. So in terms of our economy, this graph is about coal, and however, it could represent other fossil fuels as well. The blue bars represent the trend of Canadian domestic consumption of coal to reduce coal as our standards and policies put pressure so that we reduce the burning of coal to generate electricity. Meanwhile, the green bars, which represent exports of coal, are staying the same, actually increasing. So what we're doing there is relying on coal exports to drive a lot of our economy. So my vision for economic planning here, actually the federal government should be promoting a bigger vision for sustainability that will help guide our private enterprise and businesses to reorient their thinking away from more transportation infrastructure, more vehicles, more towards things like walkable cities, focus on quality of life, much less waste of energy. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
And last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sybil Seitzinger, who is the Executive Director of the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. And without further ado, if she can come up and she'll continue on with this presentation.
Great, thank you, Alistair. And it's great to be here tonight and to see all you in the audience. And also I'd like to thank the panelists for setting up a lot of what, some of the background for what I'm going to talk about. So thank you. The Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, just a couple of words about that. We're a research institute that cuts across the 4 major research universities here in BC, and we fund research that addresses climate solutions. So it informs both how to reduce emissions as well as how to adapt to climate change. And our research projects all engage with users, so with government, with the private sector, and beyond, to work together to see what are the information needs and how can research help to inform those knowledge needs. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of things tonight, focusing on electrification. And the question mark is, what would it require to electrify everything? To get us off of fossil fuel. Of course, that's not the only way. We can also have biodiesel, biofuels. And just to clarify the question in the audience, the issue of the biodiesel is that the biofuels is that the plants are taking carbon dioxide out of the air, and then we're using that plant material to make biodiesel, and then that CO2 goes back into the air. So it's really just a recycling, not a net increase in CO2 in the atmosphere like we do when we burn fossil fuel. Okay, just to kind of clarify that. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and focus on one example of electrification and what that could mean in terms of the increased energy needs, and also what some of the opportunities are, and that follows on with some of the talks that we've heard about connecting the grid. But I'm going to talk about connecting the grid across provinces, so from a national perspective. So, you know, of course we had the Paris Agreement, and now we have also both a Canadian and BC climate emission reduction strategies. And the emissions, of course, as has been pointed out, come from a variety of sources, and has been pointed out both at the BC level and at the Canadian level that transportation is a major source of emissions, somewhere between 1/4 up to almost 40% of emissions here in BC. And so I'm going to focus just one example on transportation and the increased electricity that we would need to support that. And I'm going to, so as been pointed out, we have, for transportation, we have personal vehicles, right? And I suppose a number of you maybe came in electric cars tonight, or maybe on a bicycle. We have long distance trucking, and we have marine and aviation, and those are all challenges. Some solutions, of course, coming forward with passenger vehicles, but the other two, which represent 2/3 of the transportation emissions, are really bigger, much bigger problems. I'm going to focus on long distance trucking. And as has been noted, it's not only the increased electricity that we might need if we were to electrify trucking, but also the infrastructure challenges. And there are a number of companies now that are starting to produce large trucks for long distance transportation. They're not yet sort of ready for mass market. They are also still expensive, but there's movement at least going in that direction, so there's hope for the future. One of the projects that we funded was looking at how much electricity would we need if we were to have essentially all the trucks that are used in British Columbia be electric, okay? And so, of course, you could also do it by, you could get to basically decarbonizing the transport of trucks if you used biodiesel or other biofuels. But this was just looking if we electrified. And the two approaches would be battery electric, so a big battery, or hydrogen fuel cells. And they looked at both options. And so the results suggested that by 2040, if about almost 2/3 of the trucks on the road, these large trucks, were either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell, that it would take somewhere between 12 and 33 additional terawatt hours of electricity to support that. Okay? Now the 60 is what we currently are using for electricity, right? For all sources of electricity in the province, right? So you can see that it would be a substantial increase in the over and above what we're currently using and generating here in BC. So it's a big challenge, you know, and the question is a national energy plan, a provincial energy plan, how would we produce that additional electricity? And just for comparison, you'll see this little tiny bar down here, that's the amount of electricity that Site C is expected to generate, okay? So it just puts it a little perspective, and so it would be, this amount of additional electricity would be somewhere between the equivalent of, and I'm not suggesting that we should be building a lot of more Site Cs, this is just for comparison, somewhere between 2.5 and 6.5 Site C equivalents to support that trucking. So this just shows the magnitude of the challenge and the importance of having a BC energy plan, a national energy plan, to support the decarbonization of our energy system. And then I just want to turn now to something else quite different, and that is basically to a national energy plan. And the importance of basically not each province going it alone. And it kind of relates to what we were hearing from, where did we hear? Who was talking about the interconnection of the solar panels and selling electricity back to BC Hydro. So basically interconnecting a system. But now we're going to be talking about oh, I see this didn't really work out the way. We had a problem with this slide when we brought it here. It didn't work on this system. So I'll walk you through this. Okay, so it's going to be talking about how could we connect, or what would be the advantage of a stronger connection, a stronger intertie between BC and Alberta. And let's just focus first, don't look at that side, just look at this side to begin with. As you know, most of our electricity, this is talking about electricity, not total energy use, but the electricity generated here in BC is clean. Most of it's hydro. And we also have about 10% biomass. We have low emissions from that, and we produce about 55 terawatt hours. But if you look at our sister, and we know sisters don't always get along really well, but hopefully we can get beyond that and think of us as a family. We know that Alberta uses essentially over 80% of their electricity comes from coal or natural gas. And they have a directive to basically get off all their coal within the next couple of decades, as well as then reduce their emissions overall. So the question becomes, and of course Alberta is the province with the highest emissions of any province in Canada. About 38% of the total Canadian emissions come from Alberta. So the other thing, the thing to think about is right now there's a small exchange of electricity across these two provinces. Another thing to think about is that according to BC Hydro, it's estimated that we're going to need to almost double the amount of electricity generation to support all these increased needs for electricity as we electrify a lot of our energy system. Also, Alberta similarly is going to have to come up with a lot of clean electricity if they're going to markedly reduce their emissions. So this modeling perspective was using a long-term energy planning model that also incorporated a lot of detail on short-term variability, because as we know, if you're talking about variable renewables such as wind and solar, either the sun shines or it doesn't, or the wind blows or it doesn't. And so that's a real challenge. You need some sort of battery. And basically our hydro system is a big, huge battery. So could we take advantage of that battery and to help Alberta get off of a lot of this fossil fuel that they're having to use? And so with this modeling approach, by 2060, the model optimized basically reducing the emissions from the energy system in Alberta, but also keeping BC low, and at the same time reducing costs. So the decisions in the model for what would be the various energy systems really dealt mainly with the cost issue, so keeping the cost low. And what the results showed was that basically we could reduce emissions in Alberta from 56 to 4 and increase the clean electricity, or the electricity overall generation, from about 80 to 150. At the same time, we could keep the emissions low from BC electricity generation and pretty dramatically increase our clean electricity. And the way that could happen would be that a massive build out of wind in Alberta, because they have a lot of potential for wind, but if they have 80% of their electricity coming from wind and the wind isn't blowing, well, they need a friendly sister, right? And so the idea is similar to what was talked about earlier on a household scale, but on a provincial scale, when the wind is blowing and the electricity is being generating more electricity than Alberta needs, they sell that electricity to BC. We use it then instead of using our hydro, so our hydro becomes a big battery when the wind is not blowing in Alberta. Alberta needs electricity, and so we're a kind sister and we sell it back to them. We sell our hydro back to them. So it would require a larger intertie, right? So some investment in structure here and infrastructure, but it's a way of thinking about, and just one example of how, for a national energy system, we need to be looking at what are the opportunities. This may not be the solution here, but it's one thing to think about, one opportunity for solutions. And I think that across Canada, as we develop a national energy policy, and it's terrific to have that support for that, for the idea of that and moving that forward here, that we need to think of what are the opportunities for Canada to come together to develop a really clean, whole Canadian energy system. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all four of you for that. And you know, just we touched on the subject of electrification of our transportation. And you know, from a personal experience, last year my parents purchased a Chevy Bolt, GM's all-electric vehicle. It now, you know, a company as large as GM is now fully immersing itself into an electric vehicle strategy. And I borrowed my parents' Chevy Bolt for a week, 400-kilometer range on a single charge. It regenerates, it powers up its battery every time you brake. No noticeable difference between it and a normal car, but there's absolutely nothing coming out of the tailpipe. And so absolutely when we start thinking about, you know, all of those cars you can see out there in that parking lot, when they're all suddenly plugging into the system and the kind of demand that's going to put onto the system, certainly a big question to consider.
How much did it cost, the car?
I will have to ask my parents that. They're still a little bit high, but we are going to reach that point where electric cars are going to beat fossil fuel powered cars in price, in the cost of fueling them, and in the cost of maintaining them. And once you hit that holy trinity, the market is going to take over. And I know all the major car companies, if they're serious about the longevity of their company, are really starting to make plans for this. And just given the success of the Chevy Bolt, you know, this is a small sized car. It's a small car, but because there's no internal combustion engine in it, it has a far more legroom and cargo space than a normal car would with an internal combustion engine of that size. So they are about to hit that point.
And I think by the Clean BC plan, that by 2030, all new vehicles sold in BC have to be zero emissions. So that's putting, as Alistair said, that puts the pressure on the manufacturers to step up their game too, to supply that, because they know there'll be the demand.
Yeah.
Just to add to the electric car, if you look at the initial cost of electric car is more expensive, but the cost of the electricity and the maintenance, so the long-term value, it's actually cheaper now for most electric vehicles.
Yeah, because you look at all the moving parts an internal combustion engine has,
including replacement batteries,
new transmission, everything. Yeah, there's just far more that can break down. So yeah, so as you can see from the slide, this is an opportunity where I'll take hands. You can ask questions to anyone who's given a presentation, including myself. And I also, if there's a lull in the questions, I have a few discussion questions I can use to guide the conversation. So I did see one over in this area first.
Yeah, I was just going to say my Kona just cost $51,000. And that was, I got the scrap and I got the grant, but that just covered the taxes and fees. And so, 51.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I have a couple of questions, but the first one is, when I've heard of BC Hydro, or some writer that I read in the media said that the problem with BC Hydro was that they had signed all these contracts with run-of-the-river agencies and or people, you know, companies, and that was a problem because they'd signed on to contracts that required BC Hydro to purchase that energy, but it costs more than they currently have to pay for their own energy. And so that essentially, you know, because all those projects came online, that there was now BC Hydro's paying more and then we pay more. And so I am surprised to hear that there are other ways for BC Hydro to get energy from people. And the solar panel, it strikes me that why wouldn't they, given that their rates are going to go up, why wouldn't they allow an equal exchange? And so that they could act like the storage facility, but you could give in, you know, your solar energy and then take an equivalent from them when you needed it, like in the winter or at night or something like that. And so has BC Hydro made a distinction between those two factors? And I say that because I'm really surprised that the Utilities Commission isn't pushing them more, because I worked at the Public Interest Advocacy Center, which is in Vancouver, and the chairman of the board, as a chair, was Murray Rankin. And that was in like 1983, 84, and we were established and funded by the Law Foundation to represent residential users in various utilities. And so a lot of the first work was done before BC Hydro, or on BC Hydro, because they wanted to build Site C back then. And I still have my BC No Damn Way pin from the early 80s. And we suggested that to the Utilities Commission in rate hearings that they go for demand side management instead of supply side management. And, you know, people thought we were nuts. Like, really, we were voices in the wilderness. What? Demand side management? And then, of course, they were ordered by the Utilities Commission to do demand side management. And lo and behold, they found out that that was a really great way to make money, and they ultimately, you know, put it into PowerSmart, and then they actually spun off PowerSmart because it was making money, so why keep it for us, right? But that's another thing. And so they've always been pretty progressive, it seems to me. And so I'm surprised that they wouldn't be open to new solutions, like just an equal exchange. Like, what's the big problem with an equal, like where, you know, you're saying that they won't, pay you for excess solar energy but why couldn't you kind of store that energy by sending it to them, and then they would just trade you back, maybe for a small peak fee of somebody, like, because they're storing it for you. But is there a difference in, I don't know who, but the Utilities Commission or people, do they make that distinction between the old run-of-the-river projects and solar, now that it's come down in price so much? Right. And couldn't you work on the Utilities Commission?
Is your first going to Steve?
Anybody who can answer it, but yeah, it was...
Start, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the way it works now is actually BC Hydro does do you a straight swap. So the exchange is on a kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour basis. So if you give them a kilowatt hour, they'll give it back to you in the winter when you need it. So there's no exchange of money. They don't charge you a fee for storing that. So yes, BC Hydro can be used as your battery. What BC Hydro won't let you do is send them, say, 10 kilowatt hours and only take back 9. Right? They did in the past, and then they said they would pay you for that 1 kilowatt hour extra that you had. They're not doing that anymore. As for the reasons why they're not doing that anymore, it depends who you read and what you believe and what you think, but part of it is, I believe there are a lot of run-of-the-river contracts, there's a lot of obligations they have. There's some reports of mismanagement with regards to old governments funneling money from BC Hydro. I don't know, there's lots of stories depending on what you read. The bottom line is BC Hydro is in, from what I understand, a pretty terrible financial situation. and they can't really afford to have their ratepayers, their customers, also become their competition. I don't know, there's a lot going on there, there's a lot under the hood, but that's kind of my understanding. But they will give you a straight swap kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour.
And how's the Utilities Commission?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How is the Utilities Commission? Like, are they progressive? Remember when Mark Jacquard became the head and kind of things changed, got better?
Yeah. You know, given that Tom's an intervener, he might be actually better to answer that question.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I don't know if I can answer your full question, but I can give some answer. So the net metering, right now, as I understand it, there are about 1,000 or thereabouts BC Hydro customers who are on their net metering tariff, which means 1,000 people who have installed solar photovoltaic or possibly other forms of renewable energy like small hydro or so there are 1,000 customers. As Steve said, BC Hydro used to allow the customer to generate excess power in excess of their net annual consumption, and that's now being limited. My understanding is that there's, I mean, the question of BC Hydro's rates comes into it because there is now quite a lot of people get very concerned when the rates go up. And if BC Hydro is currently in a situation where they have more electricity supplies than they have demand on their system, and if they need to get rid of that electricity, they need to sell it into the marketplace, and the marketplace is currently rather flat in terms of energy. So there's actually quite a lot of economic pressure on BC Hydro not to have more energy generation. So you mentioned the power supply contracts that they acquired, and that's part of it. But it's just all the resources added up together versus all the demand on energy added up together. I guess I'm starting to ramble. Oh, maybe I'll ask. Have I answered your question adequately?
Well, yeah. Except I see the Utilities Commission as the
Oh, as a commission, yes.
Yeah, like in the early '80s, we were saying to BC Hydro, like, how about trying some demand-side management? And they were like, what are you, nuts? We got to build a dam. And so
BC Hydro does have a big, fair-sized energy conservation program. My group is saying that they should do more, but I would say they're doing a fair job on that. And the commission does allow them to do it, and they approve their
plan. I'm Alison Watson. I'm trustee with Soup District. So my one comment, one question. Recently, our board submitted a motion to the BC Trustees Association to ask the minister to basically for the minister to align funding for green initiatives for new builds and retrofitting schools, as well as operational guidelines. Because what we're finding with Clean BC is that there are these targets set, but we're not really finding the financial support to be able to implement, to be able to meet those targets in such a short amount of time, because their targets are set for 2030, 2032. So one of the comments that I was going to make was that, and I could be wrong with my facts here, but I think I'm right, is that the districts in BC, they occupy probably the majority, if not, of public buildings in BC. So we have a huge obligation to uphold the targets set by Clean BC. And this is the part where I'm not 100% sure, but from what I've read, I can't seem to find anywhere that the Minister of Education was in fact involved in the creation of Clean BC, which I find fascinating given, again, our massive obligation. So in making this comment is that if we were to look at pushing the federal government for a plan, that the Ministry of Education would be involved in that given our massive obligation. Also in transportation as well. So that was my comment and recommendation. And then my other question actually was for Brian. I'm kind of interested in, this is me commenting on behalf of myself, not the school, not the Board of Education. I just wanted to be clear about that because they haven't made any decisions around this or anything. So I was just curious about transportation. I thought about the buses in switching to biodiesel. And I was curious about what I can't help but think about cost savings because we're always dealing with this budget and it's quite difficult in that regard. And I'm wondering if you could give me an idea around not a number, but if there are cost benefits to switching to biodiesel.
Well, when you start dealing with, I guess, bigger bulk buyers of fuel, you may have like a really good contract with, and so a lot of the petroleum companies will give really good deals to secure those contracts. Those can be quite difficult to compete with. But on a number of different levels, we can just say that at the pump, that we can provide like a V20 blend for cheaper than regular diesel right now. But if you want to go up to the 100%, then it gets a little bit more of a premium. But at this time also, you will be mandated to to be able to account for your emissions and the emissions of your any services that you contract out as well. And so I would need to go in and I need to kind of do the numbers, and that's some of the work that we do. We go and we look at the energy use, we look at the pricing, we look at how much benefit you could get from reducing emissions if we monetize those carbon reductions, or in this case, you'll be paying to reduce those emissions if you can't reduce them. Like you'll be paying for every ton of carbon that you're producing by driving the school buses with regular diesel right now. And that's a huge obligation for the school system. So if we were to be able to come in and work with you, see what the potential is and get you on renewable fuels, not only is it something that can save you money with the carbon reductions, maybe on the fuel costs, but I'm not too sure. There's more likely the fuel cost to be a little bit more, but where the carbon reductions could be less, and it could be significantly less. But also certainly for all the health reasons and everything else that, diesel emissions around school kids, so many other really important reasons to be looking at using, fuels that aren't carcinogenic in buses.
Have you worked with the Cowichan district, school district?
We haven't yet, and largely sometimes because we have talked every now and then to some people, and a lot of the places that we focused on have been areas that maybe aren't quite as difficult to get access to. Like so getting and being able to present to a school board and to be able to move it forward, a lot of times is a really big lobbying effort, much more time sometimes than we have. And so a lot of times when we are making inroads into institutions like that, we're relying on having some kind of champion inside that can help us get access or can help to move forward with a proposal, even just to look into and examine something. Because if we don't know something, like when we're dealing with local governments, sometimes we have like a year to a year and a half process to get access to a local government, to the staff, to the government elected politicians, to get to the point where we can get in front of council where they vote and then they move it forward. And so it's a huge ramp up. And so for a little organization like us, that can be tough. But typically, what we do is we're very opportunistic about that. Where we have like a champion that can help us make connections, then that can kind of move things forward a lot more quickly. Otherwise, if there's no one who's interested and you can't get the right person, it's impenetrable.
I wonder if anybody knows of any stratas who've taken advantage of any government subsidies for doing electrifying, creating special outlets for doing the plugins, or combining that with solar way to help, get energy that's not from the grid. I wonder if anybody knows of any stratas who've done that, and what obstacles they ran into, or if they've been kind of brought into the bylaws to enable you to take advantage of those programs when they come along right away.
Yeah, that kind of ties into what I was curious about, is that, we've heard about the costs that BC Hydro is experiencing. If you buy your solar panels, you're paying a price at a fixed point in time, and your price will never go up because you are now going to own the solar panels and they're going to continue to generate electricity. And I also appreciated what you showed in your presentation, Dr. Seitzinger, about how BC has the potential, even with Site C, if we can use that power to help Alberta get off of its coal-fired electricity generation. But if we're going to save our grid from the demands of plugging in our cars, I'm just wondering, what's the feasibility if say, every rooftop has a solar panel covering it, but it's not tied into the grid, but is instead powering up a wall-mounted battery unit that is instead charging up your car. So your car's charging is not being drawn off the grid. You're simply using the power of the sun. You're off-grid completely, and you're using the power of the sun at your home just to power up your car. And in the time that your car doesn't need that energy, those solar panels are just continuously charging the battery. Is that something that's being tossed around in a serious way?
Yeah, that is feasible. I guess the issue comes in at the point when your car is charged up. Then those solar panels basically turn themselves off, and they're sitting there doing nothing. This is actually one of the problems we ran into with solar thermal, is if people's hot water tank was heated up by noon, then the system turned off and that potential was gone. The other challenge you face is you then end up with kind of two independent electrical systems within your house. So one for your car and one for the rest of your house. And of course, what happens if you're in the winter and your solar panels don't have enough energy to charge your car? Right. You got to have some big Frankenstein switch to switch your car over. So logistically, it's possible. Practically, it's not really there. It's always better to have the solar panels feed into the grid so that you can provide that energy back to the community, back to your neighbors, back to everyone else. And of course, you should be compensated appropriately for that.
Well, the other challenge there, of course, is that you drive in the day and your car rests at night. That's when it charges. So we have to become nocturnal.
Although there are also some ideas around about having, they're using this developing this at UBC, where the parking garages have the solar panels on them. So when your car is there in the daytime, you're taking advantage of that daytime charging while your car is sitting while you're working away. So
and before
it takes some innovative thinking.
Before I hand it to Thomas, just a quick comment. When I was speaking with your colleague Don Skerrick yesterday, he said that electrons want to take the shortest route possible. So if your car is charging, your solar panels will automatically be going to your car because it's going to be the biggest draw of energy. When your car is unplugged, then those panels will just send it into the grid or to your toaster or whatever else is needed.
Thank you. So about the question of trying to get charging stations into condominiums. Actually there are some condominiums that have managed to install charging stations. Plug-in BC was providing quite a nice incentive, and I'm not sure if that incentive is going to be renewed in the wake of the budget that has just happened. The question of a right to charge and that kind of thing, so we're getting out of the strictly energy thing and into the legalities of who controls what and how can you get access to the grid. It's actually a fairly complex situation, as the questioner they'd be aware. I'm aware because I'm actually trying to get a charging station installed in my condominium and having to figure out a whole bunch, not only the electrical logistics, but the legal thing about my relationship with Strata Corporation and Unger. So all I can say about that is that the government is aware of the problem. There are some people who are talking about a right to charge legislation of some kind, and the Utilities Commission is doing what it can to avoid causing sort of additional problems by unneeded regulation.
Yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind here is that we're in a transition. You know, we're at the beginning of this transition, so there's going to be a lot of things that don't quite work well and that are frustrating for us as individuals and for businesses. And so, you know, we're in this for the long haul. It's going to take a while to do this massive energy transition. And so I would just suggest not getting too frustrated with the regulators or with the politicians or you know, because it is huge, and that we don't, it's not something that we actually know how to do everything yet. There are a lot of pieces that need to come together. And so we need to think of this as a long-term transition that we need to have happen as soon as possible, but we are in a transition period, so there are going to be a lot of bumps.
Just a thought, the you know, financing options for photovoltaic. A lot of people can't afford an initial upfront cost to install them, and then you give your electric car and the grid. If there be some kind of financing options, because you're mentioning that they're cost effective now, right? At $2.50 per kilowatt hour for photovoltaic. So if you're, I mean, amortizing that over how many years? 25. And they should have a life expectancy, I think, of about 100 years or 80 years?
They're warranted for 25 years,
Okay.
but basically they lose 0.5% of performance per year. So in essence, in 100 years, they'll be 50% as effective as they are today.
Right. So for long-term financing, it makes a lot of sense. There are maybe a lot of investors as well. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of putting together a bond, you know, for those people that are interested in borrowing money to install for photovoltaics. Instead of paying the hydro bill, they're offsetting by paying off their solar cells, right? And bondholders are getting a rate of return that they can't get at the bank.
Mm-hmm.
Just, you know, let's find how we're going to make that easier for people, right? Because the easier it is for somebody to implement, the more likely it's going to happen. Heat pumps, for example, like we've installed a heat pump and we had to pay back in less than 7 years. But a lot of people don't have the funds or the resources to invest that, right? But every 7 years now, of course, we recapture that initial investment again. So I'm just thinking about it. I mean, I don't know if that's part of the initiative that the research is going on, but how do we implement this? How do we get this going? Right?
It's a really important area. We're not funding anything right now on that. We haven't received any proposals for that, but it's certainly a very important issue. And we're really starting to look more at what are the financial dimensions that PIC should get involved in,
Right.
and help to try and come up with some innovative solutions. Yeah. So thanks for that comment.
I mean, what you're talking about is really, excuse me, what Nelson Hydro has already done, right? They went out and said, Nelson Hydro as the utility, we'll go out and we'll cough up the money to install the solar garden. And then we'll allow you to buy shares, if you will, in the solar garden, and you'll get a return on your investment. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago, people were getting a 2%, 2.5% return on their investment. We now see typically people putting solar on the roof, they're getting anywhere between 5 and 7% return on their investment, which is way better than you're getting in the bank, way better than you get with the GIC. Maybe not as good as you get in the stock market, but it's a lot safer than investing your money in the stock market.
If I were to sell this concept, and I'd love to, the point is that you're getting that in after-tax dollars. If you put it in the stock market, you get the income tax on it.
Yeah.
Your net is actually a lot less than 5 or 7%.
Yeah, the 5 to 7 is, I don't know if it's after tax or before tax, but basically you didn't have to go out and earn the $300 to pay your hydro bill, right? So it is actually probably more than 5 or 7%.
Yeah, it's probably 10.
Depending on your tax bracket.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic example. Or also, like if you have a cooperative housing model as well, where you know, everyone's living in a cooperative condominium, and collectively they're able to purchase and install the solar panels on the roof of the condo, and everyone's going to benefit from the building's overall.
You could even have community, like for example, neighbors, like a number of blocks where you have one area where the trees aren't, and you know, you could set it up and have a collective, right? You know, BC Hydro probably might be shaking their boots if that were to happen all over the place, but if we could, I mean, even as a number of homeowners and buying shares, if we could create a model and try to replicate that.
And in fact, that's what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to work with different communities, investment groups. I've talked to Van City and a whole bunch of other financial institutions trying to figure out how to put this together. I'm an engineer. I understand how the energy, how the technology works, but I don't know enough about the finance side of things, how you would, the legalities around setting this up for accounting purposes and all that side of things. But I think it's viable, right? When you can talk about getting a 6% return on your investment, I think most people are like, yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer.
It seems to me that unless BC Hydro is planning on damming every river, creek, and drop of water on BC, that there is a limitation to how much electricity they can generate. And sitting here thinking about the finances of buying photovoltaic cells, that could be a revenue stream for BC Hydro. They sell the finance them and you pay them back for it. And, you know, it boggles my mind that energy companies don't get into alternative energies as well, because it's just diversifying your risks. BC Hydro there is a finite limit to what they can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think you've got a point there. Like, we only have so many rivers and streams in the province, but, you know, we are also on the coast. There's a strong wind presence off our coast. We have those tidal currents, those ocean swells. In fact, in Ottawa, we had a group of tidal energy companies from the East Coast come to Ottawa and show what they're doing in places like the Bay of Fundy, which has the strongest tides in the world. I think it's a 9-meter difference. So the volume of water rushing in and out of the Bay of Fundy is an incredible force. And in fact, those tides are so powerful that their prototype turbine broke because the pressure of the tide was so strong. Now that's a good problem to have, that your prototype actually couldn't withstand the amount of force being generated. But that just goes to show you, for coastal communities, there are those other options. We have the Gulf Islands, so whenever you constrict a waterway, you know, the volume has to move through a narrower gap. So you get those bigger tidal movements in islands and in narrow spaces. Those are potentials, and I think they are worth exploring. I think, like, you know, putting all your eggs in one basket, it's all about diversification, and ultimately in the future we're going to have to be at a place where we're looking at each home as a power generating thing, and we're probably going to look at communities like Nelson, what they're doing, and perhaps our coastal communities too, taking ownership of what we have off of our coast. But if anyone has anything to add to that? No? Okay.
I would just add a little bit to
Sorry.
Okay. I think some of the big oil companies are getting into it. So everyone's heard of the Tesla Powerwall. Before Tesla, there was a company in Europe called Sonnen, and they've actually got way more Powerwalls installed than Tesla has. They were just recently bought by Shell Oil. So some of the big oil producers are getting into it, and they're realizing that the end of oil is coming, and they're going out and buying renewable energy companies.
Yeah, that's right. Shell in particular is actually snapping up biofuel companies. They bought a biofuel company in Edmonton just a while ago.
The Clean BC plan does talk about moving toward electrification significantly. So reducing the use of fossil fuels, getting into electrification. BC Hydro is expected to have a significant role in that. That planning process is starting to happen now, and you'll see it happening in coming years. And although I would say that both government is quite concerned about cost and trying to keep the rates down, because the cost of natural gas is very low right now because of all the fracking. The temptation to go with gas is there, and the cost pressure of developing renewable energy is going to tend to push up the electricity rates. So, but it's a price worth paying.
I just follow up on what Alistair was saying about various sources of energy that we need to think about for diversification. And he was referring to the tidal energy, but also at UVic there's a major initiative looking at wave energy off the coast of BC, and how that could be used to generate. You can think of something going up and down and being able to use that physical movement to generate power to generate electricity. So really looking at how some of these remote communities, without having to build out massive transmission lines to them, could be on a quite reliable source of electricity. But again, a lot of technological development is still needed so that things don't break or corrode. Yeah. And I just comment on, since you brought up the Clean BC plan again, is that in that plan, the estimates are that by the plan basically is targeting the 2030 target right now of a 40% reduction in emissions over 2007 levels. And their estimates are that that BC Hydro basically can supply all the increased almost all the increased electricity needs based on their current plan, with an 8% increase in production. So I think again it's a long-term problem, not a long-term 50-year, but you know, it's an evolving process of dealing with the situation that BC Hydro is in right now financially for whatever reason we don't quite understand, and they being able to maintain being viable at the same time as we've got this energy transition going on. So stay tuned, and we really need this national energy plan. So
question for you before you hand the mic over.
Sure.
With the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, passive house designs, or in Europe, of course, by 2020, net zero or near zero home and building construction is the goal, whereby buildings don't use any power? Or net,
yeah, they'll
near
be
zero.
Right, so that they can be buying and selling energy, electricity over the course of a year, but over the annual cycle, net zero energy.
Last I read, by 2020, that's going to be the building code standard in Europe.
Right, and here by 2032, all new buildings need to be net zero energy ready, which means that they can install a solar panel on the roof to make them actually net zero. So they can choose how they get to that. But basically, really, the advances in construction to make our buildings, our homes, our commercial buildings, our schools, not only use a lot less energy, but be a lot more comfortable and pleasurable to be in as well.
Exactly, highly insulated.
Yeah.
And then when I look at the room here with all the high ceilings and all the glass, it's like, wow, unenergy efficient.
I was in a passive house up in Fort St. John, which is where one of the first passive houses in BC was built. And it looks just like any house that you might go into that's newly constructed. It doesn't have the huge high ceilings, but it's a very comfortable environment. It's very quiet, very pleasant, and lots of windows, but very highly energy efficient windows. And the windows open, you know, which is really important also. Anyway, yeah, so passive houses are very nice to be in, and also houses that have a lot of wood construction too, and can be very energy efficient in terms of how they
This building actually met the gold LEED standard.
Right, that's right.
There's a question for the gentleman in the back. You've been waiting patiently. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I'm here because I support the initiative to have a national clean energy policy. we'll talk about politics. Can you have a national energy grid without changing the Constitution? Power generation is a provincial jurisdiction, and I think that's enshrined in the Constitution.
True.
Can we have this? Can we have a concept where a professor makes us build the grid across borders? I mean, Ontario and Manitoba trade electricity. Ontario and Quebec barely trade electricity.
And Quebec and Newfoundland have had their historical
East
troubles.
Coasters barely trade electricity.
Yeah.
So the question is, can we, from technically or political point of view, get there without changing our Constitution?
No, you don't. You do not need to change the Constitution, because if you look at trade between the provinces falls under federal jurisdiction, and you know we've seen this. You may have heard of that case where the man from New Brunswick tried to bring beer in, and the Supreme Court kind of took a narrow view, but the Supreme Court has also left it open to in regulating trade between the provinces. The federal government can easily strike down the barriers. That is within our constitutional jurisdiction. Now, we have not done that because a prime minister does not want to start off his or her mandate with a war with the premiers. Now, that being said, the premiers of each province absolutely must be on board in this. And I think the power and the strength of the federal government is to highlight a national vision, a plan that the whole country can get behind. But I believe in cooperative federalism. I don't want to simply impose Ottawa's will. I would much rather have a cooperative bunch of premiers coming on board, looking who's rich in renewable energy, like British Columbia and Quebec, and figuring out how we can have that national energy grid. So in trading between the provinces, that does fall under federal jurisdiction. However, you're going to have the provinces on board because they themselves are the ones who are generating the electricity within their own borders, and some may have a surplus that they're able to sell and so on. You have anything to add?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to say, although BC Sustainable Energy has BC in its name, we do think kind of globally. I'm inclined to think that the best energy solutions will be continental and global. So not opposed to an east-west grid if it makes sense to support renewable energy solutions. But we need the Americans to become sustainable as well.
We already sell a lot of electricity.
Sure.
Yeah.
One last observation. Until 5.5 years ago, I lived in Ontario. And I lived in southwestern Ontario, where, as of today, the latest data that I picked up was that 43% of all the wind energy that's produced in Canada is produced there on the shores of Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, Lake Huron. One of the problems that your national clean energy program needs to do is to learn from the mistakes of the Ontario government, because they made a lot. They were well-intentioned in their green energy movement, but they pissed off a lot of people, and it cost them the government. You cannot find a liberal anywhere within one of the ridings where there's a wind energy. And so politically, you have to be careful that this is not something that you, again, like you said, you can't force. Like the provincials did in the province of Ontario, they told local municipalities they had no jurisdiction over the matter. Whether wind generation was coming, solar generation was coming, geothermal was coming, you're on it. So it's an important lesson to learn. You've got to involve the locals. Because, you know, where I used to live, I could look out at night and see 60 red blinking lights from the FAA lights on the top of every one of those windows. Now, you know, when the first 5 or 6 went up, I thought, that's pretty good. But when I couldn't go 30 miles without seeing nothing but them, I started going, this is not quite my aesthetic. And this is what you will find. There's in Ontario, the NIMBY feedback from the rural population about clean energy generation was so intense that it's still there. And you're going to have to be careful about how you promote it.
Okay, yeah, no, good point to take in, absolutely. And we'll just we're going to wrap up quickly, so
I have one more.
It's going to have to be very quick.
I was just interested in wind energy. I was looking at the UK, and there was so much backlash against it, and I said, why isn't there any problem in Germany and Denmark? It's because most of it's cooperative based. You know, the farmers had buy-in, the local people had, and they could control how much development there was. Privatizing, I'm sorry to bang on this, but privatizing that thing and foisting it on the local people just doesn't work.
So the Nelson model.
Yeah.
Joe?
Now that I know all about biofuels, has there been any movement to actually generate biofuels? Because I'm thinking of like how you export raw logs and how we export canola to China, and Richardson International just got half of their supply, you know, blocked. Like half of their produced supply that goes to China is now not allowed to go there. And so why don't we make factories here where we generate canola oil and then sell it for fuel use, as opposed to using like used cooking oil and stuff like that. If it's so efficient or so useful or whatever.
Yeah, it's a good question, and some jurisdictions have just been better than others at supporting that. I can say in British Columbia, it has been probably one of the worst places to try and run a biofuel facility for a very long time. The province has started changing that. And so I think we are going to see a couple of new biofuel facilities being built in the Lower Mainland. And certainly there were some bigger ones in Ontario, but a lot of them went belly up just a little while ago. There's been two really, really difficult periods. And so if you think about it, everybody wants, you know, on a large scale, when you start getting into a large scale production, you're basically selling your product into the petroleum market. And so your product, like there's huge pressure for the product to be the same price or cheaper to be able to use it. And there's still a lot of misunderstandings, you know, by fleet managers and some of the places where the biggest demand would be. And so you have to try and incentivize it. So for all these different reasons, biofuels have really been at a disadvantage for quite a while. And then you get something like Saudi Arabia and the fracking industry flooding the market in late 2014, 2015, and the price of oil going from $100 a barrel to $25 a barrel overnight. And that is very, very difficult to try and to compete in that kind of a market. And I mean, you even hear I think a Saudi minister talking about how that is even a strategy for kind of taking out some of the renewable energy competition. You certainly set it back in the 70s. The last kind of energy crisis when solar and renewables like biodiesel were on the upswing, and then all of a sudden the prices cratered again, and a lot of that went away. I think we have a lot more momentum now, but still we fight against those kind of international commodities markets, and the swings can just completely, you know, bankrupt you in a short period of time. Like I say, especially when that's the only thing you're doing, you're selling into that fuel market. And so in North America, especially right now, as I say with the fracking industry, the market's being flooded with cheap fuel, and it makes it very, very difficult without some kind of subsidies or some kind of way of insulating that market. Otherwise, they're just at the whims of the commodities market.
So before we conclude tonight's town hall, I just want to show you a quick video from an organization called Iron and Earth. Iron and Earth is an organization that's made up of workers who have jobs in the oil and gas industry, and they're going to talk about what's called a just transition strategy. Because I think when we look at our economy and the fact that we still do have a lot of people who have direct employment from oil and gas, it's certainly been a great source of wealth for our country. But if we're going to seriously deal with the topic of how we move to a clean energy strategy, at the heart of this conversation is what do we do with the people who are currently employed in oil and gas? And the thing is that they have skill sets which we can use in the new energy economy. We're talking about people who have high-class welding tickets, are gas fitters, pipe fitters. They have the skill sets with a slight bit of retraining that we can use to build this new energy economy. But don't take my word at it. Just watch this short 4-minute video from workers who are in oil and gas who want our politicians to employ a strategy that use their skill set in the new energy economy.
We are Iron and Earth, oil sands workers for renewable energy. My name's Liam, and I'm an oil sands worker myself. A 4th-generation Boilermaker, I grew up on the BC coast, and I'm passionate about protecting our environment. Hey, how's it going, Jimmy? Good to see you, buddy. I've tried to find work in renewable energy, but year after year, the only jobs available to me are in the oil and gas sector. While leading industrial nations like China, America, and Germany are creating millions of green jobs, Canada just seems stuck on one idea: the fossil fuel economy. I think that needs to change, and I'm not alone. Many of my fellow oil sands workers are starting to think this way. People like Randall Benson, who has built a successful solar company creating jobs through training and installation.
There are 175 watts at standard test condition, which is 25 degrees. I had to make a plan for me to be in this new renewable energy field.
We are skilled workers, electricians, iron workers, pipe fitters, boilermakers, carpenters, and many more trades. And we could easily transfer our knowledge to the green economy.
What better way to inform the other side than to come from the workers already inside and ask them what they think? Like, I'm out here making a living and I enjoy it, but I still see a need for renewable energy.
A lot of them are really conflicted, myself being one of them. I think a lot of people would want to make that shift, actually. Instead of having one egg in the basket, so to speak, we could have people doing what we have here, installing solar on roofs. That could put a lot of people to work, especially in those bust cycles when the oil and gas industry isn't doing so well.
If we had leaders, people with vision, we'd actually work towards a sustainable energy future.
With a new federal government and a booming global renewable energy sector, now is the time to harness the skills of Canada's oil sands workers. So join Iron and Earth and help us build a strong, vibrant, green economy for all Canadians.
All right, and just to wrap things up.
Oh, the show is phenomenal.
Look at Shen Yun. It's this heavenly experience. I have.
So just to conclude, you can see from just grabbing another headline here that in 18 countries that have strong policies, they've actually made their emissions fall. And I think from what we've seen tonight from the panelists and the discussion that needs to happen, it's a big challenge. But if you look at what our societies have been able to do through some of the big events in the 20th century, the collective effort that we employed to fight the Great Depression, to get ourselves out of World War II, to do the Marshall Plan for Europe, humans have been able, through their collective energies, to move mountains before. And I think if we put a similar effort in tackling climate change and building that new renewable energy economy, we could do similar things. So with that, I would just like to sincerely thank all of the panelists for coming tonight, for sharing your perspectives. perspectives, and to you, the audience, for showing interest in this subject. And let's hope that going forward in the years ahead that we start to see some of these great ideas actually employed in real time. So